For many years in the young Avok's life, Great Puck had housed the Pale Swords, sword, shield, and other various weapon-carrying members of a fighters guild that handled many non-Avok disputes among the Pale Shores, specifically in the sparsely populated southwestern reaches. Almost certainly the guild had stood longer than the Avoks had been there, but he could only certify with his own experience that it had been running for the last 6 years of his young 18-year life. There were Avatok of many ages in the guild, wise and seasoned combat veterans, as well as energetic and ambitious ones like Skeli'n. Not that he asked, but he was sure none of them could imagine life in the area without the guild. At least, he could not imagine his life without the guild. As he re-entered the complex, he saw 2 cloaked figures that he had hoped to never see. 2 delegates from the Omneutta adhocracy were in the main area, one each from the division of abidance and adherence. The guild was to be disbanded and organizations like it would no longer be allowed. I may not be allowed to lead this guild anymore, but that doesn't mean I don't care about all of you. Mike felt a heavy hand on his shoulder, that of Aklandov. So what becomes of all of us? What am I to do, still not old enough to work according to those boneheads at Vanpok? I know. I am unsure of what most of us will do, but for you I have this. We received some correspondence from a Pori by the name of, bear with me, Al Hicks? Yes, Al Hitch. Good on him, still alive. What did he have to say? Well, I thought you might like to read for yourself, so we transcribed it out. Aklandov handed Mike a sheet with what was noticeably hastily scrawled words. How long had the delegates been here?
My Skeli'n, I anticipate you will read this in good circumstances. Either way, I am compelled to again thank you for rendering aid upon me the last time we met. Your assistance was invaluable to my pursuits. If not for your aid, I likely would have perished in unfavorable circumstances. As an expression of my thanks, I extend an opportunity of business for your services. A team of ethno-archaeologists I now work for requires the services of an individual much like yourself. The coordinates of the destination can be transmitted to a map device after the duration of this message. We will be awaiting your reply in the next 10 hours. Al Hitch.
10 hours? When was this received? Oh, do not worry. We replied in your name and said you accept. It's all the way in Parallelium, but you could guess that. The elder Avok began to steer Mike back toward where he had been living and away from the common area where the delegates still lingered, answering questions from other guild members. You'll be leaving as soon as you can in our small craft. I'm trying to save the 2 others to ferry the remaining guild members around Pale Shores as this point of our lives comes to a close. But your story is just beginning. You must go. Right, I was going to say I was going. Mike paused, looking around what he now realized was his room. So this is it? I just go and there's nothing to come back to? The tops of his eyes sagged as he turned to look at Aklandov for perhaps the last time. You can always go home. You think so? With all you've accomplished? Aklandov took a moment to let the sadness dissipate from Mike's face. I am going to go make sure your ship is ready. Gather all your things, but don't take too long. In a way, he was glad to be free from the guild. All of the Avoks insisted on using an S in his nickname, calling him Maisk. While correct, he preferred Mike, as the speech impediment he had as a child made it hard for him to pronounce the letter S before his jaws had fused. Al-Hitch was a Pori who did not always stick to the prescribed notions of decorum that Pori seemed to inherently possess. For instance, Mike did not know Al-Hitch's surname at all, as he had never said it. Because of this, Al-Hitch called the Avok Mike instead of Skeli'n or Maisk, and Mike liked him for it. In the 42nd hour of his journey to Zistalilche, Mike was awakened from a partial slumber to the sound of a wailing alarm. Not very loud, but shrill and concentrated. Hungry and tired, he stumbled onto the deck. The alarm ceased, and the Avatok added confusion to his current list of adjectives. He placed his map into the receptacle next to the wheel and began checking on the ship using the map's projected interface. The alarm had come from a beacon tuned to his ship's frequency band. Perhaps there's a band saturation and I picked up the signal by mistake and now I'm out of range? Odd that it would stop as soon as I came to the deck. He tapped on the beacon, which fed him gibberish text. Well, not gibberish, but he could not decipher Jibhaga. He tapped the beacon again and the map translated most of the text. Eager Institute, Ethno-Archeo Department. Wasn't that the department that Al-Hitch sent his correspondence from? Mike tapped the map, closing out of the text field and zoomed in on his current location to find the source of the beacon. Unable to find it initially, he changed the color of the beacon in the display, only to find the new red light blinking on top of the light representing his ship. He looked up and, to his surprise, found a ladder protruding from a ship flying perfectly above his own. Wait, when did this get here? I'll have to get better about vigilance on these longer voyages. Despite perhaps better judgment, he scaled the mast partially, jumping to the ladder and proceeding upwards into the ship.
Our apologies for not meeting you on your own ship, but we do not have enough suits for all of us to make the excursion to an open deck,
said a red-faced Poria who was behind him as he climbed off the ladder and into the ship.
You must be the security agent our colleagues spoke of.
Well, yes, said Mike in a way that he hoped followed enough of their conventions. He was off guard before remembering to introduce himself. I am Skeli'n.
Greetings, we are the ethno-archaeologists from the Eager Institute,
said another Poria, whose yellow hues lit up the small room better than their counterparts.
More accurately, the four of us are ethnologists and archaeologists working on assignment, and you know our coordinator.
The Pori separated cleanly into two groups of 4 and 1, leaving Al-Hitch by himself, so Mike stood closer to him. What exactly are you 5 digging up? Al-Hitch was hesitant. This was a professional environment which dictated he stick to Poria convention as much as possible.
I will defer to Dekul Dul-Yek Alzisya on the inquiry and can follow up with you on your deck momentarily.
Before bowing to the other Pori, not Mike, and leaving the room, perhaps to get a suit.
We are researching a previously unknown city of Poria from early after time and assess the state of its architecture after its abandonment several centuries ago. In addition, we aim to analyze the area, discern whether any unraised Pori remain, and assess living conditions in an area with little to no recorded history. We were planning another assignment at the time in which we found an old poem that held the coordinates of a city we had no historical record of.
The Pori paused momentarily before continuing with a different face.
We will arrive on the planet star Zistalilche within a few hours, and it should only be an hour to move our equipment to the location.
It seemed like certain gibberish to Mike, but he nodded and made his way back down the ladder. If they only had a few hours left, he was hungry. As he shoved the last bits of fish set aside for this voyage into his mouth, Al-Hitch came through his door clad in a shiny new suit to keep his molten insides safe from the vacuum of space. I knew you'd just properly cool. Mike finished his food and continued after cleaning his mouth off. But don't you still knock?
Do I need to?
Well, no. So, what's the deal with this excavation?
Dekul wasn't wrong. There's a city we do not have a record of in history that appeared in one small anecdote with coordinates. They dated the anecdote, and soon we will be digging up the city to make a better record.
And this requires me?
we are not quite sure what will be found.
What does that mean, Al Hitch? In the only time Mike had ever seen Al Hitch change his face, the Pori also shrugged. With that, he turned and went back onto the deck, presumably back to the Poria ship. They'd be landing on Zistalilchis soon. As the two ships came down through the atmosphere, Mike guided his ship into the lead. It was wood where theirs was metal, but he was protection and had to land his in the water, so he wanted to make sure they didn't stray too far from where he could land. Pirates. Mike could see them scattered about his ideal landing spot, a nice fat river. He had been trained, of sorts, to spot them over the years, but he wasn't sure whether the Pori could see the pirates or knew to even look for them. Before he began the landing procedure, he quickly ran inside, getting his double-volge shield and 2 pistols that he had never used on a guild mission. Hopefully they still worked. Upon returning to the helm, Mike pulled his ship up into a slower descent so that he could immediately disembark. Before the engine shut off, and without throwing any anchor overboard, the Avok flew from the railing onto the banks of the river, dropping his weapon as he landed so that he could roll. The Pori in their ship seemed to stall overhead, so they must be able to see at least something was wrong. As they hung in the air, there were no shots or attacks from the pirates to the ship. Did they not have any firearms? Not that he would have time or interest in asking the pirates. After a few had been dispatched, he watched several more crawl out of the river, presumably coming from the other side. Typical pirates didn't climb into his ship and take his escape route away, just came and tried to kill him and take his stuff to sell for lot. These pirates too were made quick work of, and before he knew it, Mike was watching the Pori land their ship on the opposite bank of the river. Disgruntled, the young Avok threw his Volge onto his back and swam back to his ship. After climbing up the hull, he stood on the deck and motioned to the Poria ship. He wanted to talk. When Al Hitch was on the deck of the Poria ship, Mike called out, "Where to from here?"
We need to travel an hour inland away from the river.
Pointing perpendicular to the course of the river as it was.
Or we can take our ship there in minutes. Yours will be abandoned.
And if you leave your ship here, what happens to mine? In response, Al Hitch threw a thick metal cable, like a rope wove from metallic fibers, that Mike struggled to catch.
Tie this to something metal and don't get in the water until after I return.
Al Hitch then went into the ship, and moments later, Mike saw a wave of electricity come towards him on the cable, stopping just short of where he had tied it. Momentarily, Al Hitch was back outside the ship, motioning for Mike to come as close as possible.
Get as much as you can of weapons and a few days of food. The cable is safe to travel for now.
As quickly as the Pori had come out of the ship, he disappeared again. While Mike was getting his supplies together, the Poria retrieved their excavation supplies and a mobile camp that they would wheel to the dig site. Momentarily, Mike and his belongings were traveling along the cable, onto and quickly off of the Poria ship. The 4 archaeologists and ethnologists would be traveling with their gear, while Al Hitch and the Abatok would bring up the rear with the mobile camp and their supplies. Naturally, the 2 acquaintances passed time as they walked in hushed voices to avoid the civility of the other Poria.
How is your time at the guild coming? Have you saved many more omniscients? You've been there a few years now, right?
Actually, the guild closed down just as I got back from my most recent mission.
Oh, so you won't be going back there? What happened?
No, after this, I'll be trying to find consistent work. As for the guild, hola. Al Hitch was silent for several seconds, changing his face again while maintaining eye contact with Mike.
I see. Assuming this expedition is fruitful, there could be more work for you with our department. Perhaps this team or another. We were supposed to go on another research trip before we discovered this.
Pondering, Mike was silent for a moment. Have you heard of the Resistance?
Who?
I think they work against Ola.
So they shut your guild down and you're going to fight them? A war?
Maybe. Mike shrugged as much as he could with all this equipment on his back. I need food, bed, and something to do with the rest of my life.
I see.
The Pori up front looked behind them, and Al Hitch broke into his civil tone.
We require your assistance here. However, your contributions will be appropriately compensated, but I cannot guarantee future work.
Mike shot a look ahead. That mountain was getting bigger. Right. So the group pushed on with Elhitch and my Skeli'n at the rear, still speaking quietly.
After this, are you going to the Resistance?
I don't actually know where it is. I've heard that it's somewhere around here, on this end of Parallelium.
This is quite a large subsection of Omneutta. You could be searching for years, if not decades.
Right.
What if they do not want you?
Mike shot his Poria friend a sideways glance. And why wouldn't they want me?
Ola could be tracking you and finding their hideout that way, since they shut down your guild. Or they could be an organization that is invite only. Maybe what you have heard is wrong and they do not want or need warriors. Perhaps they do not like Avatar.
Alright, that's enough. Who doesn't like Avatar? After more idle conversation and silent trudging, they had reached the mountain that was believed to contain this lost city. Mike had no clue on how to operate the mobile camp, so Elhitch and the other Pori coached him through the process of opening the camp, which he would soon be watching. Not unlike other Pori establishments he had seen, the living spaces, if you could call them that, were efficient. The archaeologists and ethnologists had space to put their belongings that they had carried all this way, and spaces only slightly larger for them to sleep in. When it was dark, the Pori would return from the shaft they had dug into the mountain several meters up the side and take short shifts throughout the night, ready to wake Mike if there was a problem. In return, the Avok would watch the camp during the day for any threats. For 2 days, it was fine. On the third day, since they had set up camp, Mike couldn't shake a feeling of unease for several hours. In the previous 2 days, one of the Pori would at least come to the side of the mountain from the tunnel until he acknowledged them, but on this day, several hours passed without any sign from the cave. More troubling still was the feeling that he couldn't shake. He knew something was lurking, but he could not figure out what. Reluctantly, he left the camp and approached the mountain. Several meters from the mountain, about halfway from the camp, he had the inclination to turn around and look at the camp. He was a little higher than the camp now and had a better viewpoint. From here, he could see them closing in on the camp. He looked around and they were coming from all directions. How had the pirates, in such large numbers, closed in on him undetected? Out of the corner of his eye, as he turned to run to the tunnel to alert the Pori, he saw the pirates lighting torches and then lowering them to the ground. Quickly, and still running up the mountain, Mike looked in the other direction. The pirates were lighting the whole mountain on fire. Hey, are any of you close? Can you hear me? Mike shouted as loud as he could into the tunnel. He didn't wait long for a response before quickly scrambling back down the mountain, somewhere between running, falling, and sliding down the loose rock surface. Back at the camp, he could see the pirates a couple hundred meters away as they all amassed in one group to move through one section that wasn't on fire. Mike and the Pori in the mountain were trapped, and the pirates knew it. They had planned it. Thankfully, the scientists all had their instruments inside the mountain, so there wasn't much in the camp he couldn't take. He had all of his weapons already on his body, so he filled his hands with as much of his own food as he could muster and threw a couple of canisters of the materials that the Pori ate. Whatever it was heavy and he could only carry a couple of canisters in addition to his food. They'd have to share. By the time he got to the tunnel entrance, the pirates were already through ransacking the camp and were advancing on his position with haste. He went several meters inside the tunnel, where the light from outside ran out, and dropped his belongings. Thankfully, the canisters provided a small amount of light. Running back to the entrance, Mike could see maybe 100 pirates making their way up a mountain single file. That has to be a pretty big galleon, or several ships worth of pirates. There was no way he could handle them all, even if he had the stamina. Without a better idea, Mike retreated just inside the tunnel and took out a pistol. The Pori had set up the first few sets of tunnel supports as arches, but as he looked further inside the tunnel, they had used sturdier supports. Maybe because if they knew where the side of the mountain is, it's easier to dig out just a little bit than dig out a mid-tunnel collapse? Poria are usually smarter than me, so that seems like a good idea. Taking aim, he shot at the first 2 keystones in the arches, hoping their fall would collapse the entrance to the tunnel and the pirates could advance no further. His shots were a partial success as the second keystone popped loose, bringing down that section of the tunnel with it. Mike retreated under a support beam made out of metal several meters further into the tunnel where he had left what he carried. Where did they even get metal for these support beams? After waiting a few moments to see if the pirates broke through, he picked up his items and moved further into the mountain, unaware that the collapse of the second section brought down the first as the pirates were beginning to enter the tunnel, and thus sparing further pursuit. After what felt like an hour of walking, the young Avok finally caught up to the Pori, who were still working. For a few minutes, he was able to watch their work without being noticed. One of the 5 Pori would heat their arms, removing all of the hardened plates and sticking their molten appendages into the far wall of the tunnel as far as they could without climbing into the wall themselves. After they removed their arms, 2 of the remaining 4 used tools shaped vaguely like pickaxes to pry the rock from the wall, beginning with the tools inside the holes the arms created, and eventually spreading the full width and height of the tunnel. The other 2 would then feed the removed rock into a machine that slowly produced beams that held the tunnel up. The last Poria to take their turn melting the wall was Al Hitch, who exclaimed when he saw the Evok standing there, arms full.
Mike, what?
He quickly caught himself, remembering the other Poria around.
My Skeli'n, what is the purpose of your presence here?
Well, our camp got surrounded by pirates. Another Pori spoke up, whose name Mike did not know.
Did you say pirates?
Yes, pirates.
Are you certain that these were pirates? What was the quantity of their presence?
A Pori, still creating a new beam, asked, obviously not distracted from the task at hand. Mike recognized this one as Dekul Dol Chakalzisya. Yes, absolutely. I believe around 100, but they didn't follow me in. I knocked out the first 2 stone supports. All 5 Pori stopped working for several seconds. Al Hitch spoke first, changing his face as he spoke.
You did what?
Well, pirates were coming, and I'm good, but not that good. They had already taken our camp, which is why I have all of this. Mike interrupted himself, motioning with his head to the pile of goods in his arms. I shot the first 2 supports out to collapse the entrance, the ones that were rocks so they couldn't get in. Dekul spoke up again.
It is no matter now.
Turning to the others.
We have no option remaining other than to continue forward. It is fortuitous that my Skeli'n saw fit to bring lava containers.
Lava? That's what's in these things? How am I not burning alive? All 5 Pori faces changed into somewhat similar shapes, all resembling some form of laughter or excitement.
Their Emporia, whose intellect far surpassed those present here.
Al Hitch spoke up, clarifying somewhat to Mike. So the group continued forward, making progress slower than before, as during the time of day when the Pori would normally sleep, they kept tunneling, burning through the lava canisters just 6 hours after Mike arrived. When he woke up, Mike noticed the tunnel felt much different than when he began sleeping, perhaps some hours earlier. To his left, towards the outside of the mountain, he could feel less space and air, despite not being able to see further than a few meters in that direction. To his right, he could see a faint glow in the distance, much further than he knew the tunnel to be. He got up, slowly walking down the tunnel. His food was almost gone, as were the lava canisters. In the distance, he could distinctly see one Pori walking towards him, separating itself from the glow. Just how far did they dig while I was asleep? Mike and Al Hitch met a good 20 meters away from the rest of the Pori, and from this distance Mike could tell something was off. Their glow was hardly any brighter even at this distance. Al Hitch held up his hand as Mike started to speak.
We have lost Dekul.
What do you mean lost? He couldn't have wandered off.
Death, as you call it. Poria cannot survive in these conditions.
Mike paused for a second. Down to 4 Pori. Them too. You look dimmer.
We are now consuming the support beams from earlier in the tunnel. I personally stopped counting after 20 pillars.
Consuming? Mike slowly drew the word from his mouth, completely confused by even the consideration of the question. Quickly rebounding before Al Hitch could answer, he continued. Does the 20 include the top and both sides of the supports, or each set?
I counted the sets. Consume as in an attempt of replacing what the lava canisters were.
Right, you guys ate all the lava and now you're eating the rock pillars?
Not quite. There is no direct equivalent to your process of eating. Rather, we consume the lava, and it is both an energy source for us and somewhat equivalent to your blood and skin. We quite literally use up our bodies as energy, and the lava replaces both.
So the pillars are
insufficient in both regards. It gives us what you might call malnutrition. Dekul was not in the best condition, but even the remaining 4 Pori are not far behind. The worst possibility is that we might run out of air, which we also need in order to properly burn energy.
That could be a problem. A loss of air doesn't impact me, but I can't dig myself out in either direction.
So far, we have been frankly lucky that enough air is filtering through the closed end of the tunnel and the mountain around us us. None of us are advanced enough to determine which support beams would cut us off from our air supply.
I can help dig if that's burning too much of your energy.
You do not have much food left either, nor can you eat.
Al-Hitch cut himself off, turning his head toward the other Pori, where one of them was trying to get their attention, but it was barely louder than he and Mike were speaking. All Mike could hear was,
"And my Skeli'n must come with haste."
Perhaps he heard his own name and made up the rest. Either way, the two made their way down the tunnel, where the three Pori had finally found their destination. One of them turned to Al-Hitch and Mike.
"Were there any research journals among the items you put into the tunnel? I believe there's one stored with one of the two canisters. I will seek it."
They turned to Mike and spoke slightly softer.
"You should go and get all of your things and hurry back here."
The Pori reached out, almost grabbing Mike's shoulder before realizing their arms and hands bore no plates and thus would burn the Avok alive.
"Do not run or unnecessarily spend your energy."
In a few minutes, the remaining 5 made their way through the hole in the tunnel, with one of the researchers carefully filling out the remaining journal, furiously tapping and clicking against the digital inputs. As they made their way into the city, the group found vents of magma glowing several meters beneath the surface. What they needed was there, but out of reach. In the city center, they found a long simmering volcano, a deep and narrow crater whose sides had clearly been dug in to carve paths down the main vent to where the surface of the magma should be, but it was presently even lower. From their vantage point, one Poria made the observation that lava had cooled over part of the lower pathway. The, apparently, remaining lead researcher handed the research journal to Al-Hitch and took another Pori down to the path where they were able to consume enough lava to be near full. Al-Hitch handed the journal back and took the remaining Pori to do the same. Upon their return, the 3 researchers spread out among the inner city, and Al-Hitch kept watch with Mike. Good thing we found this crater, right?
Mostly, yes.
Mostly?
There are a few issues that this crater presents.
Such as?
Foremost, this city seems to be in direct opposition to our previous conclusions about Chiritul Cherta.
That sounds like a name for a Pori, not a city.
You are not incorrect. It has been some time since we have named cities in this fashion. I did not do well in my studies of history, so I cannot accurately place this city other than to say it seems to be older than our initial research led us to believe. The architectural style is from the period of time we suspected based on the age of our source, but the name of this place is problematic. The name suggests a city before the timekeeping reset, but the buildings are 100 years after that, if not more.
That sounds odd.
Yes, and further, there was an abundance of Pori eggs in one building as we came to the crater, suggesting the city was abandoned rather than carefully left as our source suggested. In addition, Pori did not live this close to an active volcano, which the careful pathways down the main vent and auxiliary vents into the town center suggest they did for hundreds of years before the reset, just after our creation as a species.
So what now?
We gather as much data and observations as our research journal can hold and figure out how to get back to our research institute. I hope our ship is operable or otherwise ignored by the pirates.
Mine too.
If ours survived, yours likely did as well. The ship can power the low voltage cable for several weeks if need be.
As the pair watch the remaining 3 ethnologists and archaeologists go from the remains of one building to another, one of the Poria had been in one place for quite a while the other 2 had come and gone between several buildings. Inside, he found no Poria after asking several times, but a rustling of rocks and metals that would not subsist. Suddenly, a creature much larger than Mike shot forth from the ground, causing the young Avok to flee. "Al-Hitch!" Mike was shouting while running back to the Pori. "What is this?" A strange face was adopted by the molten figure, one which Mike had not seen before. Al-Hitch began to backpedal towards the crater before mustering an answer, which did not seem entirely directed at the Avok fleeing the beast.
"Decoys, run!"
The 3 remaining Pori quickly scrambled together, trailed by the diminutive Mike, and now 2 of the large decoys. Unable to catch up with the Pori, he quickly scrambled up to the top of a building, only standing a couple meters higher than the decoys on its hind legs. Both of the creatures continued to chase the Pori around the largest vent in the center of town, seemingly buying time until Mike could figure out how to defend them. In a rash burst of confidence, Mike jumped off the building and landed in front of Pori, motioning them to continue running and to get on top of the building he came from. Quickly, he pulled his double bulge out, attempting to slash across the face of the first decoys he met. Unsuccessful, he began backpedaling while he pulled out his 2 pistols, firing them off as quickly as he could. This startled the creature enough to force it back on its smaller hind legs. Mike took this opportunity to thrust at its plated underbelly, staggering it backwards into the other decoys. Both tumbled into the crater and let out terrible shrieks as they burned alive. By the time Al-Hitch and the other 2 Pori had climbed down and caught up to Mike, he had been watching the magma slowly rise up the vent. Al-Hitch saw it too and was alarmed.
It is time to leave. Most, if not all, of the auxiliary vents are full of cooled magma, and the decoys falling in it seem to have stirred the chamber.
How long do we have? Also, what were those things?
I am untrained to make that assessment. Come, I will explain.
Where are we even going? Mike was confused, but complied nonetheless. He trusted Al-Hitch. Mostly. The Pori responded first by pointing at a lone ray of light poking through the mountain that surrounded Ticerdul Certa.
That shaft of light is likely why we, Pori, have not yet died in this main chamber. We must climb.
How are Poria at climbing? Mike was fairly adept at climbing, but this angle would be rough, hanging nearly upside down at certain spots before reaching the exit. The 3 Pori were in the process of melting the plates on their hands, which now looked more like the amorphous hands of a Ketla.
We can make our own ladders in the wall.
And almost sensing his apprehension, continued.
You will be fine.
As the magma began to audibly bubble and hiss with the dissolution of the decoys, another pair emerged from the ground. Now sprinting, Mike demanded answers from Al-Hitch, who was the only Pori keeping pace. Have to know now, what are those things?
Decoys live around volcanic vents. The research journal must be delivered.
The 3rd Pori was falling behind. As Mike looked, he was noticeably dimmer. The volcano's magma had not responded well within his body.
Do not worry.
Al-Hitch produced the journal in the hand he had not removed plates from before quickly returning it back amongst his garments. Turning and running again with Mike, he continued.
Decoys can hibernate for hundreds of years, keeping their rock plates tight to their body to retain heat and open them again when they are awake. Like Poria, they consume molten material to survive, but they cannot touch it. The insides of their bodies are much tougher than the outsides, which is why they prefer smaller Pori who they can eat whole.
As they reached the side of the mountain, the 2 remaining Pori had fully molten hands and feet, thrusting them into the side of the mountain much like how Mike would climb a glacier with ice picks and pointed boots in pale shores. Well, if he wore boots. Don't you have any sort of defense against them? Mike now climbed in their indentations along the wall. They were right, this was no problem at all for him. Still, he kept his head turned, watching for the decoys to follow them up the wall.
Not particularly, other than Pori gifted with some of Poria's more explosive talents. This is one of many reasons Poria no longer lives as close to volcanoes.
You don't? What's the difference between Ticerdul Certa and modern Poria cities?
Several hundred meters, bottle refinement factories, and buildings built to withstand creatures of such size. In addition, decoys do not normally travel outside of volcanoes. They live in dormant or barely active volcanoes, and are forced to flee when it is nearing eruption. So their presence in pre-modern Poria cities was used as an early indication of an impending eruption.
So you don't have anything to kill them?
It is hard to kill them. As a species, we are generally opposed to unnecessary violence, so we have not developed any weaponry for this scenario. You need not look behind you to see if they follow. If a decoy wanted to chase us, they would likely burrow through the side of the mountain, run up the much easier outer slope, and burrow back where we are.
Great. Mike instead looked up at the hole in the side of the mountain, which was now close, but not close enough to soothe his anxiety. I just have to worry about a giant monster digging through a mountain I'm climbing from the inside and eating me.
You will be fine, as you are not made of molten material. They likely would be unable to detect your presence through rock, as you do not exude enough heat.
Al-Hitch looked down at Mike past the other Pori and then back up.
We are not far now. We must climb only a couple minutes more.
Just as predicted, within a few minutes they were climbing from the mountain, and after a few minutes more they were near the top, looking over the mountain at their camp on the other side. With no pirates in sight and Aspen beginning to disappear over the horizon behind them, the now trio began their journey back to their ships. It would be an hour's trek, just as long as they had taken from the ships to the camp, but this time they could walk faster without the equipment, which made up for the increased distance. Shortly after most of the light from Zistalilchi had faded, the two Pori went into their ship, disabled the electricity, and Mike got on his. Mike detached the metal cable, and that too was returned to the research vessel, and Al Hitch came out carrying something small. He motioned for Mike to come to the railing of his ship. Once there, the Pori tossed the small item with a good amount of force just over Mike's head, where with a jump and outstretched arms, he was able to grab the item. The familiar jingle of lot in a pouch greeted Mike as his hands closed around the coins, and he walked back to the railing. So now we're even?
No, you saved me again, and we are paying you for it, so I still owe you from last time.
Help me look for the resistance then. We'll be even.
Unfortunately for you, I have to return to our research institution immediately with this data, but I can contact you. Your ship will have a beacon. I remember your frequency quite well.
With that, Al Hitch bowed farewell and returned to the ship, which took off rather quickly.